All right, well, good evening, everyone. Really excited to see this great turnout tonight for our community conversation about data centers and energy and what TMRPA is trying to do. Awesome that you're here. I want to give you a little lowdown on what the plan is for tonight. We've got, hopefully I can keep it to about 30 minutes of presentation time. And I would just ask that you kind of respect that time, because then the next hour will be spent in conversation. We can ask questions back and forth. We've got several stations where we're going to try and garner public feedback. We've got experts from Tumwa, we've got Nevada Energy in the room, we've got the Governor's Office of Economic Development, and we'll be able to ask questions of all that and get your feedback. But I'm happy to sort of start out by giving you an understanding of what we've learned, and I want to go ahead and caveat this. I'm just learning about data centers, right? I started this back in January when the Regional Planning Commission asked us to take on learning about data centers, research, and what are some of the impacts we want to get ahead of. We are planners after all, so we are trying to understand this and get ahead of it proactively, right before all of these things show up. But I will just say that some of this stuff is in process, and we're moving, right? And now we're drawing a line tonight and having this conversation, but we're going to continue to keep moving and keep learning. And I appreciate what you guys can bring to the table, and I really appreciate how much you care about your community that you're here tonight to share this with us. So, thank you. All right, with that, I've started the timer, and here we go. So we're having a community conversation today about data centers, and also TMRPA, that's us, the Truckee Meadows Regional Planning Agency. What's our role in the energy sector? And again, I'm Jeremy Smith, and I'm the director of the agency.
Jeremy, is there a way to turn up the volume? Maybe close the door?
Possibly. Tyler? How about, is that any louder?
Maybe. I don't know.
Slightly louder still? Going for it. One, how now, brown cow? Unique New York. That's about it. So I'll try to speak very loudly. Okay, and commence. All right, well, number one, what is a data center? I think you're here, most of you probably already know, because you're concerned about things, but they're really these big giant server farms. Giant buildings full of computers that are powering the internet, all of the digital economy, bringing you Netflix, bank transactions, streaming services we talked about, helping the security and military sector, anything to do with computers. And we continue to grow this sector, and now especially in the face of artificial intelligence, the need for this computing power is really starting to grow even faster. This is a bit of a dated slide, but it does show that there's a very clear upward trend in investment in the data center market. And this sort of is talking about different components of it, but the main thing to look at here is it's going up. And in fact, it may even be going up faster than this. And when I was looking at this slide deck earlier today, I brought this one out, which is talking about what are the top US data center markets, right? You probably all have heard about Virginia, Loudon, Virginia. They were really progenitors of the data center thing. You can see they're way up here in terms of megawatts that they require. Now this is back in 2023, 22, 23 time frame. And look at these numbers. At that time, study published in 2024, that worldwide, I believe it says, across the globe, 7.4 gigawatts. We're already seeing that being blown away. And in fact, from reading the NV Energy IRP, it's possible that just this region will need on the order of 7 gigawatts. So the demand is increasing incredibly rapidly. This one was shared to me by one of our regional planning commissioners, Carrie Rohrmeyer. It's an article from the High Country News, and it had some fun little things to talk about. I thought it was a neat to maybe show, just to get a feel for what are we talking about. So, energy per query. To do a Google search, 0.3 watt hours. ChatGPT, AI, requires more. And down here this is really a neat sort of estimate. A number of US households this could power for a day. with a single, with 3.5 billion, I guess, searches, it's 36,000 homes. With ChatGPT, it'd be 100,000 homes. So just to kind of get a feel for AI, and this graph shows it pretty well. The old school, standard Google search, the little bar. ChatGPT, quite a bit higher in terms of energy needs. AI-powered Google search, even higher. And so as we continue to leverage AI, we're going to continue to see greater and greater energy demand. And then this one was just fun on the bottom. So if you're composing a 100-word email using ChatGPT, that takes about 16 ounces of water, and it'll charge up 7 iPhone Pro Maxes. Pretty interesting. If you're creating a 5-second video, it's about a gallon of water, and you can run your microwave for about an hour. And it turns out that, and Nate Kusha, I think you'll enjoy this, that eating meat actually is more impactful to our water supplies, that even one actual hamburger consumes about 600 gallons of water, right? And so a real world burger actually uses more water than an AI generated one. But of course you can't eat the AI generated one. All right, so just kind of getting a few facts out there about data centers. What are they? What is the problem we're trying to get our arms around? And now to the kind of meat of tonight's presentation, there's really two main foci, I guess if you will, that we're trying to look at. Through state law, TMRPA has an actual role with something called projects of regional significance, where we weigh in on energy projects. It's a conformance review. So as the director of this agency, and I'm very concerned that we're going to be doing the best job we can when those energy projects come our way. So that's part of what I want to talk about tonight. But the lion's share of tonight's presentation is really about understanding data centers, and what do they mean, what do they require, and what are some of the standards and sort of strategies we can implement to get ahead of and be proactive about, mitigating negative impacts and sort of, to the degree possible, exaggerating positive benefits. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Okay, so required by state law, TMRPA, per this NRS section 278.026, any electric substation, transmission line that carries 60 kilovolts or more, any facility that generates electricity greater than 5 megawatts, and we're talking about gigawatts, but just 5 megawatts, natural gas storage and peak shaving facilities, and gas regulating stations that operate above a certain threshold, all of those get reviewed for conformance with the regional plan, now the 2024 regional plan. And so that takes place at our regional planning commission, and it typically follows the approval at the local jurisdiction. And what we're looking for there is we use a specific set of policies to do this work. And tonight we're going to ask you to help us understand if you think we're getting it done with this set of policies. Is there more we can do? Is there something we're missing? But I'll go through them really quick here. So PF stands for public facilities. That's a section of our policies in the regional plan. PF11 is basically saying map all of the regional utility corridors and sites in the regional plan. And we do that on something called map 3. PF12 talks about setbacks and widths for regional utility corridors. Number 1, to respond to those setbacks as defined by the National Electric Safety Code, but further to make these corridors wide enough that we can co-locate other facilities within them. And this idea would be, let's not splay all over the landscape all of the infrastructure we need to the degree possible. Let's put it in a corridor and manage where we can expect to see that infrastructure in the ground or in the air. And that's really what this next policy talks about, which is a preference for using existing regional utility corridors for the placement of new infrastructure. Even if it's not electrical generating or transmitting infrastructure, utilizing those corridors is a priority. And in fact, if you look closely, and I think on one of the boards, you will see this, there's a hierarchy of 8 steps for what we'd like to see, the last of which is establish a new corridor. So we're really trying to utilize the corridors that exist to, again, minimize the impact on the landscape. And you can see here using utility corridors and sites for other utilities other than energy, specific rules for the airports as well. And then this one has been interesting, but undergrounding power is very expensive, but we have a policy that just basically indicates our governing board, our elected officials that run the regional planning, can opine on undergrounding in certain cases, understanding that there are these costs, they can't force it, but they certainly are able to talk about it. And then we have two kind of general policies. One is we promote regional renewable energy, which I think is pretty cool. And finally, we want to, in our natural resources section, foster a resilient region. Those two kind of work hand in hand. So those are the specific policies right now that help govern how we would perform a conformance review against the regional plan for any of these things that are mentioned here at the bottom. All right. This is a cool table that I've shown before in some presentations, but bears repeating. Over the past 10 years in Washoe County, through our office, we've processed conformance reviews for all of these projects, which collectively are creating over 1,000 megawatts of energy. Mostly solar, about 960 or so is solar, maybe a little bit less than that, but a couple of geothermal projects as well. That's about 7,000 acres of land that's been used, and that's about 0.15%, or 0.15% of the land area in Washoe County. And you can actually look on this map that's over there and see exactly where all of these sites are. And then this is our map 3 in the regional plan. What we know is that the regional plan is it's a book, right? People, I guess, use paper still these days. But mostly, if you really want to delve in, like we have map 3, it's an example. But if you want to go onto our online regional plan data viewer, that's where we're going to be able to zoom in and out and really see where these sites are, get information about them, understand how it all interacts. You can, zoom in and out and turn on other layers as well. So that's how we map the regional utility corridors and sites. So at the end, we'll have options for questions and you can hit me up on that. But that's really, it's going to be station 1 over here, where we're asking for your feedback on, is there more we should be considering? Are there more policies? Are we missing something in terms of that specific role for projects of regional significance? Because state law says we have to do it. We want to make sure we do it as well as we can. But why do data centers matter? Then if I'm talking about our role being TMRPA, right, doing this review, because the energy demand that's going to be coming forth to power these data centers is probably going to necessitate growth of energy generation and transmission in Washoe County. And so we're going to have to do that role in response to the proliferation of these data centers. And to the degree possible, we want to understand what's coming down the pike and what are some of the impacts that data centers bring as well. And we've been tasked to do this by our Regional Planning Commission and Regional Planning Governing Board members. So this is our big research project, and I will just tell you again, we're learning as we go. We might not get it all right tonight, but we're going to continue to learn, and with your help, we're going to get there, I'm sure. Tonight we're going to talk about energy demand, water use, land use considerations, some economics, and then some strategies and standards for data centers. So this is kind of a fun table that, thanks to Jeff Foster at the City of Reno for passing this along to me. These are recent data centers that kind of kicked off this effort. They were requesting approval in Reno, and folks were like, hey, are we making the right choice? Do we know what the impacts of these data centers are going to be? And there's been a healthy debate about that. But Jeff provided this to me so we could get some local data. What are these data centers in Reno actually? They're pretty small compared to what's going on in Story County or the Apple thing or what's going on in Fernley. These are actually pretty modest. But what you can see here is that about 45 megawatts total. The water use in terms of acre feet per year, this is adding up to 12. Maybe it's more than that, but even if it's double 24, that's still on the order of about no more than 50 homes for water use. Employment, pretty low. Apparently pretty high paying jobs, but not a lot of employees. And then here's the size. So this is just a nice starting point with local data that actually we know has been through the process here and is on its way or in construction now. So let's talk energy. It's always a little scary to talk about energy with Nevada Energy in the room because I'm learning as I go again, but honestly, I think we've learned some important stuff. Nevada Energy is preparing or has been preparing and is prepared in many places to serve what they know is coming down the pike. But that's constantly changing, and that's why we'll talk about on the next slide. There's a process to get ahead of it. Also, NV Energy is not regulated by TMRPA. It's not one of our affected entities or jurisdictions. We have a slight crossover in that project of regional significance space. But really, the Public Utilities Commission of Nevada is the entity that governs NV Energy. And here's some of the points about that. What the PUCN is trying to do. Ensure fair and impartial regulation of public utilities. Provide for safe and reliable operation. And then this one I think is very important. Balance the interest of shareholders and customers with fair returns on investments while maintaining just and reasonable rates. So it really comes down to the PUCN working with NV Energy to make sure we have adequate service and that the rates are balanced and fair. And so here we are with the IRP, or Integrated Resource Plan. This is a process that NV Energy engages in, I believe, every 3 years. Most recently completed in 2024. And this is where they're trying to get ahead of the demand. They're talking to people, they're understanding what the prospective businesses coming in are going to be. And therefore, they can plan out what sort of resources they need to expand the grid to be able to accommodate it and how they're going to do that. Well, in reading through it, it does seem like our peak loads in the what's called the Sierra portion of NV Energy's business, which is northern Nevada, which I don't think is limited to this area per se, but is basically not Vegas. Our peak loads are around 2,000 megawatts. Given even just Story County, the prospective data centers looking to locate in Story County, that could increase by almost 6,000 more megawatts. And it's changing so rapidly that even though this was just adopted in 2024, NV Energy has already begun an amendment process to try to keep up with the fact that more and more data centers are coming. So there is a plan. You can participate in this plan. You can provide feedback, and you can try to understand it by working with NV Energy through the IRP process. I think what we know is that this stuff doesn't happen overnight. It's going to take time for these, and significant investment. It's really kind of feedback. Yeah. Thank you, Tyler. You're close. I don't know. Maybe I don't even need it. Can I just talk loudly? Okay, just put that over there. Turn it off. Oh, dude. Unless I'm singing, because I'm in a band. But not for this. Okay, I'm just going to speak loudly. Do better. So, it's going to take time for these improvements to be materialized on the landscape, right? And it's going to take money. And that's what the IRP tries to get ahead of. But even so, some entities, like the Victory Logistics District down in Fernley, are going to move forward on their own, with their own generation using natural gas and an array of natural gas generators to get their first phase of a big data center they're planning going. Then, when NV Energy gets to the point where they can deliver that power, they'll take that and they will have an amazing backup system. So that's just one strategy. People are trying to keep it moving and keep meeting the demand. NV Energy is very conscious, along with the PUCN, that people have concerns about rates. And I think we all in this room would agree that we as existing customers do not want to pay for this out of our checkbook, out of our pocketbooks, out of our bank accounts, right? While these data centers make a big profit or whatever they do, and that's their idea. There's a societal contract to this too, a societal benefit, right? We all use our phones. I mean, we're not live streaming, but we are recording our digital stuff. But I mean, we're constantly utilizing this new technology. So the fact that we might need to pay a little more, is reasonable for that societal benefit. But it shouldn't be foisted onto us to pay the big bill for all this development. And so that's what NV Energy is trying to do to stay ahead of that, is work with these high energy businesses through a series of agreements where they front the costs, the business fronts the cost for the upgrades, and then that is recouped over time and paid back to them. But there are some legal nuances to that. In terms of this thing called PUCN Rule 9, that's a legal scenario that PUCN has created with NV Energy, that there are controls, I guess, on how
how those agreements can be set, but it pretty much applies to transmission and substations at the location of the business. So that's kind of that Rule 9 legal sense. But I spoke with the PUCN, and they're actually in process trying to come up with additional rules that would cover energy generation. And there is no limitation on Nevada Energy as a business entering into an agreement with a prospective data center or high energy business to also help front the costs of the generation. And to my knowledge, that's what is happening. And so the idea being that the data centers, to the large degree, are going to be paying the bill for the power that they need to operate. And then paid back over time. So we've got Jeff and others from NV Energy in the room. After this, you can ask them questions. But I think there really is a good faith effort to put the upfront costs onto these businesses that are coming. Rule 9 is a legal framework for transmission and substations, but energy generation is also on the table. Okay, here we are at the rate making. And I'll be honest with you, it's another place where I have a lot to learn about exactly how this process goes down. But I did speak to folks, the director and the lawyer there at PUCN last week. And basically, the PUCN regulates how energy rates can be increased. And if you want to be participating in any of that, they recommended that you seek out that link there, the Bureau of Consumer Protection and the consumer advocate that works in the AG's office, because that's actually the individual that can participate in the process. You can go give public comment, but I bet many of you are frustrated by how public comment works, right? You go to a meeting and you say stuff and everyone just looks at you and they can't respond to you at all, right? It's kind of frustrating because you got things to say you want to hear. Well, what do you think of my idea, you know? So if you want to get into that what do you think of my idea zone, you need to, as I understand it, work through this bureau and the AG's office and make those connections. You can still go provide public comment, but this is the interactive way to get your ideas and your concerns voiced and addressed. So, even though we have, I think, a very responsible energy utility, a very responsible Public Utilities Commission, in this region, other regions have seen some impacts to rates in association to data centers. I don't know that we have that evidence here, but in Oregon, they have seen impacts. It's another kind of hub for data centers. And they recently passed a law that sets specific energy rates for data centers to ensure that they're going to pay their fair share for this expansion. That might be something that the state of Nevada would be interested in doing at some point. The Mid-Atlantic Grid, which is a collection of states like Delaware, Illinois, Indiana, stuff, kind of in the Midwest and back east, an advocacy group there did a study and showed that there was about $9.3 billion in rate increases across that whole multi-state grid area. 70% of those increases seem to be related to data center growth. So there is evidence in other communities that ratepayers that are existing ratepayers could bear some of the costs. And again, I go back to, we should, some of it, but an appropriate amount that is relative to the actual benefit we all receive, right? So that's what we're trying to stay ahead of, and I think the PUCN is also very invested in staying ahead of it. Protecting customers from rate impacts is a core function of the PUCN. That's not a direct quote, but that's basically how the conversation ended. So that's the message that they're asking me to relay, that's what they're trying to do. But let's talk to the consumer advocate.
Jeremy,
Yeah,
sorry to interrupt, but there's spaces there. Is that underlined?
those are underbars that aren't seen because it's a link.
That's what I
If you
thought.
go click on it, in the end you'll hear about our plan to deliver all this information to you on a web page. We're going to make everything we've done so far and everything we do going forward on one web page site on our web page, one web page on our website. So you'll have it all at your fingertips. Using probably data centers. So that is energy, right? That's kind of what we've learned about energy. And we don't regulate energy. We have that little slice and we're trying to stay ahead of it. But doing the research project, trying to find out how is it addressed. Trying to be objective and neutral about that. Let's talk water, because early on in this research, Jeremy got it wrong. And that's the second bullet. And I think, we put out there from the internet, from the initial research, these big, massive water numbers, 12,000 acre feet for a megawatt. Thankfully, The folks at Tumwa said, Jeremy, that is insane, right? And we're able to sort of, we curtailed that, and here again is the water use from the 3 data centers at about 45 megawatts. We're seeing 12 acre feet. Now again, this might be low, might be a little bit low, and in practice it could be a little higher, but it's not going to be 12,000. It might be 50 at that maximum or something. It could be more. And that's what the good work that the folks at Tumwa are doing right now to make sure that when a data center comes in, they actually understand what the real water requirements are going to be. But it is not what I did here. So maybe in a very water-rich environment, you could use that much. And why would you want to? Why would you want to use that much water? Well, if it's cheap, it might be cheaper than power. And that's what this graphic down at the bottom is trying to kind of indicate. Water, these data centers generate a tremendous amount of heat, right? How are you going to cool that? Well, you could use air conditioning, but then your power costs are going to go up. If you use something like evaporative cooling, and the water is really cheap, maybe you can keep your costs really low, and the energy that you're using is really just to power the computers. That would be, in this power use efficiency of 1, would be that all the energy you're using is to power the computing. Now, no data center gets to a full value of 1, but in a water-rich environment, you could offset power costs using evaporative cooling. That is not a good fit here. We're in the desert, right? Our water resource is limited. We need to make sure that we're taking good care of that. And so in conversation, not just this table, I talked to the public affairs officer for this region from Google about their data center in Story County. They wouldn't tell me what number of megawatts they're using. It's a business, a lot of it's secret business stuff. But they don't use any water except for domestic water. Sinks and toilets. They're not using water to cool anything at that Google data center. And the woman said anywhere from 5 to 500 megawatts. So you can have a massive data center that can be cooled without water. But that raises the power need, and that exacerbates the grid thing, and we have to also be aware of that. But this is the relationship that we're seemingly understanding now. And then just to make sure that I'm correct, and because I was wrong again, but just to clear up some stuff, I began talking with folks at Truckee Meadows Water Authority. There was this idea that at 100 acre feet, if a business came in and requested 100 acre feet of water, that there would be a check by the Tumwa board. Well, in talking with these folks, it's actually the general manager of Tumwa that would do that check. It's a very good idea to do that check. Oh my God, it's already 6:30, that's crazy. All right, but it only applies to what are called Rule 7 water rights, which are the water rights that Tumwa banks, so that if you're a developer, you're coming in, Tumwa has a certain amount of water rights, you need water, you can purchase it from Tumwa. But they're not the only game in town to purchase water rights. And so if you've got it from someone else, like Fish Springs, the pipeline coming from Honey Lake area up there north, then that check is not there. And so that could be a place where we use some water. Then there is a check at 625 acre feet in the project of regional significance, a resolution and guidelines in state law. That's our agency, and we would do a review, right? But maybe we need to consider as a community some lower threshold so that we don't find ourselves in that condition. And then finally, I would just say treated effluent is a great option for all kinds of industrial uses. And in fact, it can be a boon to our effluent disposal systems if we're able to send that off. And the pipeline has been constructed, does go out to Story County from our Tumwa facility, up to 4,000 acre feet. Eventually, can go through that pipe. Right now, it's about 350 acre feet being used out there in Story County from that source. So I wanted to correct the record on that. All right, really quickly, we'll go through the land use considerations. Data centers, often located in industrial commercial land use areas, can be innocuous. You might not even know it's a data center. Or maybe it's super lit up and you think, oh my God, that's clearly a data center. So they take all forms. One thing we've learned is that high square footage per employee, there's not a lot of employees in these really big buildings. Most of the employees in the buildings are computers, right? They're doing the work. And so, commensurately, vehicle trips are low. Truck traffic is low. But there is quite a bit of noise, potentially humming of the equipment, diesel generators for backup, that kind of a thing. And they're lit up and secured 24/7. These things are running 24/7. Just because it's 3 a.m. doesn't mean I'm not searching Google, right? So they got to be available. Here is some comparison data If you think about general industrial, you might have 6 to 100 or 6 to 1,000 square feet per employee. Data centers, I drew a line through 1,000 because I think that's too low. And even looking at the ones in Reno, oh, hello. Yeah, way behind schedule, guys. Just want to let you know that. 5,000 square feet might even be a minimum, right, for this kind of square foot per employee. So very low. It's a pretty hefty land cost for not a lot of employees. But apparently the wages are higher than or at least at an average wage we're talking about. This is the trip thing. You can see that at the very bottom, 1.1 on the fourth column over, chip generation for data centers is the lowest. So if you've got an area where you've got a bunch of trucks coming in and out and you've got a vacant lot or an empty building, a data center could be a great idea right there. The power is available because you're not going to be adding a bunch to the road network. So you need to be thinking about opportunities. Trade-offs. What I've learned in this job is that it's always about trade-offs. You can't get everything, right? And that's kind of the definition of consensus. Everyone loses a little bit. Not everyone is happy. Then you probably got there. So in terms of positives, they fit into industrial commercial, low vehicle trips, less trucks, but lit up, not of a great use of land area if you're trying to get a bunch of employees. And could be noisy, and that leads us to make this blanket statement that more compatible with industrial commercial than it is with residential. So we should probably be thinking about standards that avoid interaction with residential. Okay, here's where it's going to get really off the rails, okay? Because I am not an economist, but I'm doing my best to kind of put this stuff together. And one of the things that we've got here is an incentive package for data centers in the state of Nevada that the Governor's Office of Economic Development puts out there as part of the attraction to get data centers here. So why do data centers want to locate here? We're close to Silicon Valley, super quick, low latency transmission of information. We've got land, relatively cheap compared to other areas. We've got an energy provider that can serve the energy or is preparing to do that. And we've got these incentives, abatements. And so you need to sign up for 10 to 20 years. As a business, there's specific criteria, has to do with how much capital investment you're going to do, how many employees you're going to have, what are those wages going to be, and there's a time frame. And if you don't meet the time frames, if you sort of fall out, this is similar to like the NV Energy agreements. I didn't mention this part that, part of the requirement on the agreements is that these people have to actually use the energy that we're building the infrastructure for, or we're going to come back after and recoup those costs. Same here. You get the abatement, but you don't fulfill the requirements, we're going to try and get that money back that we lost through the abatement. It's, there's pros and cons here. I think proponents say that it's a great long term. Like there's an initial investment, an initial revenue gain from the data center locating. It's part of the business calculus to get them here. And then long term, after 10 years, for example, then you start getting the full price of the tax revenue. But also, we gotta be careful that we're just getting not a lot of money for this thing that might have these impacts on our natural resources like water, on our land, and on our rates. So that's what we're trying to surf that line and understand, right? What are really gonna be the impacts? So to help me do this, one more thing. There's also this other thing, franchise fees. So through state law, local governments can charge, through an agreement with the energy provider, a franchise fee up to 5%. So, and that's based on the rates that are being paid for the energy. So that's really kind of a revenue boon, potentially, as big energy users come in. Our local governments are a bit strapped for cash in this current cycle. This could be a nice influx of money. I believe both Sparks and Reno are at 5%, that's the maximum. My understanding is that Story County is at 1%, making that more attractive in terms of the overall energy cost for a big energy user. All right, here's where we get in the real danger zone. Okay, we're gonna continue to work on this. But thanks to Diane Vanderwell, who hooked me up with Jeff Sudich at the Northern Nevada Development Authority. They're dealing with this down in Carson and down south here, I think Yerington as well, in terms of building a system to understand the ins and outs of a data center when it's proposed and what that means in terms of costs, and what it means in terms of revenues. And so please understand that this is completely theoretical and very preliminary. But I got this from Jeff, and we're just going to kind of talk through some of the things. So 30 megawatt data center, very similar to what Webb was. Very similar in size, about 100,000 square feet. Jeff gave me these numbers, but again, hypothetical. 200 million in capital equipment. Capital equipment is a little bit different than personal property, which also is a big number, 350 million, in the sense that capital equipment gets depreciated. So there's a certain threshold, like at regional planning, we have a low threshold. If we buy something for more than $5,000, we depreciate it over time, put that, and we have to track that. But if we buy a computer for $2,000, that's just our personal property. And if you're a business, you pay taxes on that personal property. So if you bought a lot of expensive computer servers, that's a lot of money that you would have to pay tax on in terms of personal property tax. And also, in terms of the sales tax to purchase this stuff up front. And then notice the smaller cost is in the property. The land is the small cost, according to this hypothetical. Computers are what is really driving this thing. In this theoretical scenario, we got 20 jobs, and we got a looped cooling system, which is basically something you charge once, and then you don't have to use the water. The water's in the closed system. So those are kind of some of the assumptions, and I gotta say that they're all different. Every data center utilizes their own technology that they think is superior. They have a business model. You know, this is not a one-size-fits-all, but we're just kind of going to go through this as an idea. Okay, so this is also from Jeff at NNDA. So part of the abatement thing is that these jobs have to be high-paying wage jobs. They can't be substandard wages. There's not a lot of them, less than 20, but they are above the average median. The low water use, we talked about the loop. I think this is interesting, and I've been seeing this pop up in other regions in the research, that data centers can foster, like many kind of developments, the extension of infrastructure that allows other businesses to get in there too. They can be the kind of the forerunner, right? And so looking for redevelopment opportunities where we know we need infrastructure, or areas of our town that don't have infrastructure provisions currently, data centers could be a good option to help bring that in. Again, making sure that we're not in a giveaway mode, but just understanding that it can become this anchor tenant. And also this generation of revenue for local governments at 5%. Apparently there's 3 different levels at which energy can be given to a customer. Here I go, getting out of my depth again, but there's secondary voltage, primary voltage, and transmission voltage. And I think as you go into the primary and secondary, there's more equipment necessary, the substation to change it, and so it's a little more expensive. $845,000 for this example at 5%, secondary at $830. If you get transmission level power and you build your own substation, you pay $680,000 in franchise fees in this example. Just the 5% of all of that energy load that's needed. And then finally, computers don't last forever. I mean, how long? I've made them last for a long time in my life, my own personal computer. But these things running 24/7, they have a replacement cycle. And as you get out of the abatement scenario, all of a sudden the sales tax is at the full level. So over time, if the data center persists and is buying new equipment, that revenue continues to be generated, even at higher levels than the initial. 640, I know, but this is really crucial. Everyone wants to hear this. They want to hear this slide right here. This is where I really, don't take any pictures. No, just kidding. But it's like, that's a dead giveaway. So I tried to do some of the math here. Jeff gave it to me without the abatements applied. I know I've applied the abatement incorrectly. And so we're going to have to continue to work on this and get it onto our webpage. But basically, at that transmission level power, because if you're if you're at 30 megawatts, like this theoretical example, you're going to probably get transmission level power. So your rates are going to be slightly lower, and that franchise fee is going to be slightly lower. But still almost $700,000. But where it really comes in is with tax revenue. Now I saw 2%, but Jeff sent me this one's at 3%. But 3% of, I believe it was the 250 million, is 6 million. And that is where that's coming from. So that would be unabated tax revenue. And then the property tax, that's the sales tax revenue. And then for annual property tax and the personal tax, My understanding was that was at 75%. The rate that he cited is 3.4%. I got to check on that rate and see what's the standard rate in Washoe County to make sure we do this math right. But it's another 6 million where unabated, that 30 megawatt example, theoretically, right, could generate on the order of $10 or $12 million, right, in revenues, part to the local governments for franchise fees, part to the state tax revenue that gets redistributed. If you put, and this is where it really goes off the rails, I just did a 75% abatement on the top of that, right? Just to kind of get a ballpark. That brings it down to about 3 million. So if these costs are true, and we're gonna keep dialing this in, you're somewhere probably in terms of revenue north of this number, because this is probably too low. And this is obviously too high if you have the abatements. So somewhere in between there, probably towards the low end, right, is what we're going to get in those initial years with this kind of a scenario, with the abatement structure that we have. And that's very loose. And so that's year one. That's year one, right? And then over time, right, you're depreciating some of the values, so you're getting a little less, but then you're reaching the 10 year, 20 years, and then you're going up. So it's a matter of, it's pretty complicated, and again, I'm not an economist, but trying to give you guys some perspective, and we're going to continue to work on this to try to understand it better. But there is money coming in, is what I'm trying to say. If data centers come here and they're investing in our community, we got to watch out for those impacts. We got to make sure that all the costs aren't coming out to us. But we are getting an influx of money, right? That is happening. All right, so we'll never talk about that set of slides again. Let's move right on. No, we're going to continue to work on it. I'm going to talk to Jeff. I know that Jeff at NV Energy has some information about that too, and we're going to continue to get that more resolved. But the point simply is that even with abatements, there's still significant investment for data centers coming here. Let's talk about standards and strategies now, though, because outside of my bailiwick is the economics. Now we're getting back into the land use world a little bit, and what we want you to do with one of our little games we're going to play is kind of rate some of these things as you see their importance or not. But just kind of wanted to give you a heads up about what's happening in a couple of other communities. Here's data center capital of the world, Loudoun County, Virginia. This is happening right now. This is March of this year. In Phoenix, last month, these things are being adopted. We're not far behind what's going on having this conversation. In Virginia, they've now ended the by right data center approvals. So even though you're in an industrial area with zoning, you can't just go get a building permit, you've got to go to a public hearing. That's a big move, right? You have to get a basically conditional use permit. And they've changed their master plan to align with that. But they're also in process on creating a set of standards that are all about the site, noise mitigation, water, other siting mitigation. So that's happening right now, exactly, dark skies. In Phoenix, just last month, they adopted some stuff. They have some master plan amendments that are very much generally promoting things like don't go next to residential, or don't go next to our mixed use and transit centers. Interestingly, this one has potential standards for locating near transit. This one is saying stay out of transit-oriented development areas. So different approaches, right? But they've actually adopted this stuff. They are trying to encourage sustainable building practices, noise and energy mitigations. And I thought this was, to my point from earlier, targets redevelopment areas where investments are needed, right? Those would be areas where we have those areas too, where we need investment. And maybe there's an opportunity there. And then they also have adopted new ordinances that define a data center. They set the allowed zoning designations within which they can occur. They've got guidelines for siting. They've got architectural guidelines, all kinds of really cool stuff. And so both of these things are going to be links that you can all go check out in more detail and find out the specifics. This is just a small taste of what is out there, what people are trying to do. And there's like 50 things we found, maybe. I don't know, all sorts of stuff. So what we've tried to do in these next two slides and in the activity that we've got for you is to synthesize and try to get some ranking understanding of what you guys think is the most important. So we've got about 10 or 12 of these. The first one talking about specific zoning requirements. Do we need to have an overlay district with some sort of impact fees or special assessment for data centers? Tell them where they can locate, and if you locate there, you got to pay this extra thing. We talked about land use compatibility, right? What are our siting constraints? what's our noise and light mitigation? Are we happy with the low employment numbers for that land that's being used up? And maybe avoid, residential. Data center site design guidelines, talking about setbacks. This is really the architectural design, landscaping, and shade, trying to make these things attractive and not just ugly gray warehouses that are super lit up 24/7. Water use restrictions and reporting. Probably in this region it would be worthwhile to consider standards that limit the use of evaporator. Right? We've already identified that we're not in a water-rich environment, want to preserve our resource, so I think that's a good thing to target. I think reviewing what the thresholds are, we talked a little bit about that. 625, it's probably too high. 100 is pretty good, but doesn't necessarily apply in all cases, so how are we going to approach that? And of course, utilizing the treated effluent. In terms of environment, we've got air quality concerns for thinking about that victory logistics. If we had someone located in Hydro Basin 87 and have a bunch of natural gas generators, that would never go because that would throw off our air quality attainment and would be in big trouble. So that's not a good fit for in town, but maybe it's an okay fit in Story County. We want to make sure that we're keeping track of our sustainable water resources, and I think also thinking about what we're very concerned with at TMRPA is that map over there and the future and where people want to put solar and where they want to put this high energy transmission. Let's think about habitat. Let's think about all the pieces, right, of our environment. Let's not just let it happen because we want that societal benefit. We got to balance it. Energy infrastructure upgrades, right? We got to upgrade the grid. We got the IRP process, Nevada Energy and the PUC, and those folks are working on that. We should participate in that to the degree possible. And then, of course, we have another slide, but more so because there's so many things, right, to consider. Renewable energy. We talked about the 1,000 megawatts. I think we're going to see more chances for renewable energy in Washoe County. But some other concepts like behind-the-meter clean resources. I think clean energy tariffs should have been in there, where you pay a little more, but you get renewable energy sources instead of fossil fuel. Energy efficiency, we got heat recovery systems, load shifting, backup power generation. Safeguards for existing ratepayers. We got the PUCN process. There's that provide feedback to the consumer advocate. We've got agreements happening right now where the businesses are going to be required to front the costs so that we're not putting it out there and then they go away and we're left holding the bag. And then possibly legislation. In Oregon, they passed that legislation to set specific rates for data centers. That could be an option here too. Tax revenues and abatements. Going to continue to learn the ins and outs of that and continue to present that. But it's part of the package. It's part of getting more revenues to our region, but we don't want to give away the farm in doing so. So again, it's a balance. And then finally, I thought this was really cool, and I thank the Sierra Club ladies for giving me this information. The community benefits in reporting, I thought that was really cool, Require community impact statement by a data center that's coming in. What do you propose your impacts are going to be? And can we handle it? Maybe it's a third-party vetting of that as well. So, what can we ask of these businesses to tell us how they're going to impact our existing quality of life? Cool. All right. So, 6:50, way beyond schedule. And thanks for listening to me talk for so long. Appreciate it. We've been doing a lot of research. It's great to get it out of my head and onto the screen. What are we doing next? So I mentioned a web page. We're going to prop that up next week. We're going to put everything we've done to date on that web page so you can easily get there. That includes a bibliography of all the resources that we've been looking, articles, white papers, some academic papers as well. And we'll just continue building that. We're playing a couple games tonight, which I'm going to describe. And we're going to make a survey version of those games online so we can continue to garner public feedback for about the next month in advance of a meeting on October 1st of the Reno City Council and Reno Planning Commission, a joint meeting where they're going to be discussing for the City of Reno what are some of the strategies they can implement. We're going to have this information in the background for them to utilize as one of the inputs to that conversation. And I think one of the things that we've been working on and haven't been super successful on because some of the secrecy, but we're going to try and do a better job of creating a map of where these data centers are in our region, certainly in Washoe County, but also in the greater region, so you can go see it. And there is a product called Data Center Map. It's a website you can find, but I found that it's not complete either. So we're going to continue to try to track where these things are. And then I'm participating in a panel with Carrie Rohrmeyer and some others at the APA, Naomi Dewar, Councilwoman, to talk about data centers. So by then, we'll have a better economic model to share that maybe is more viable, but we're going to keep working. I want to say thank you very much to our collaborating partners, Tumwa, NV Energy, and Alex, is that you back there? There he is. All right, good. Thanks for being here, Alex. Thanks for showing up tonight and being here to answer folks' questions. Really appreciate you. Amazing. Thank you.